let's take ChatGPT. We all use ChatGPT. We've all started using that as the way we find information. But the way you prompt determines the answer. If you ask ChatGPT, how is the Indian team doing? You will get a certain sort of set of responses. But if you ask ChatGPT, what is the likelihood of the Indian team winning the Asia Cup? You'll get a wholly set of different, and these are connected questions because that's what I, as a cricket fan, am thinking.
Correct. In my mind, they're all connected.
They're connected, but for the AI engine, they're two different questions and with two different answers.
We all have even school teachers who we remember 50 years later.
I've been fortunate both in my educational career and my work life to have known a lot of people who have shaped the way I think. The one thing I've learned through my career is the ability to communicate is very critical.
Welcome to CXO Connect, where we speak with leaders shaping the future of business and technology. Today, we are joined by Srikanth Iyengar, CEO of UpGrad Enterprise. His journey spans from Infosys to UpGrad Enterprise, where he has been steering the company's global B2B skilling vision since 2022. Srikanth, welcome to CXO Connect.
Thank you, Prasad. Pleasure to be here.
Great. Let's just start off with some of your early learning experiences. You went to IIM Lucknow. You told me that you grew up in Mumbai and Pune. What are some of your earliest learning memories and takeaways, and how have those experiences sort of helped you in later life?
First of all, I feel truly blessed to have had some of the opportunities I've had. Growing up in the west of India, one learned a very sort of hardworking culture. You worked hard, you performed in academics, and you created opportunity without any sense of entitlement. And I think the education that the IIMs give you is world-class education at a very, very affordable price. So I feel truly grateful. The other thing that these experiences taught me was the peer group is very important. And I think in India, we are blessed with having a whole set of very, very industrious young people who are aspirational and who want to learn, who want to progress. And I think I was fortunate to be part of that environment. And I think that shaped me all through my life in many ways.
Do you recollect from your student days any subject which you now think you should have taken slightly more seriously? We all have our pet peeves.
Yes. So it's interesting you say that. I'd probably say, we had a course on law, and, I'm an engineer, and then I went to B school. Marketing and branding and sales was my interest. And you think, law is for the lawyers. But I think in a world today where regulation is critical, where geopolitical tensions come into play, understanding of legal frameworks is something I probably should have paid a bit more attention to. You learn on the job.
We all have even school teachers who we remember 50 years later, right? Somebody left a sort of mark on me and made me a better student, or just made me understand something better.
So there are many. I've been fortunate both in my educational career and my work life to have known a lot of people who have shaped the way I think. But if I were to look back to school, I was fortunate to go to a convent school, as they call it in India. And the one thing I've learned through my career is the ability to communicate is very critical. So I had this particular teacher, Sister Judith, who taught us English in years 6, 7, 8, 7th, 8th, 9th standard. And I think we thought she was draconian in those days. But, in hindsight, the way she made us focus on the choice of language, the way we express ourselves is something that I carry with me even today, and I'm grateful to her for that.
From Sister Judith to IIM, how did all of this sort of help you navigate your career? Because you've, for example, operated across various kinds of organizations in various geographies and quite a diverse portfolio. How did those early experiences sort of help later? Have you ever thought about that?
The hindsight is always 20/20 when things are clearer in the rear view mirror. But I think when you look forward, at least the way I have seen my life pan out is you can have a framework within which you operate, but you can't plan because life happens and you have to, work through. But I think what's helped me is having a sense of adventure, if I call it that, wanting to explore new things and being a bit fearless because, what you don't know, you don't know. But when you go into a new situation, I'll take an example, right?
Lack of apprehension.
Lack of apprehension. And that often gives you a lot of confidence because you're sure about what you can do, and there's a whole set of things that you cannot do. But you don't let those pull you back. You don't let the fear pull you back. You just try your best and be confident in your ability to make progress.
If you had to pick up, let's say, one leadership lesson from each of the companies you've worked at, I mean, your major sort of standpoints, some places like, let's say, Infosys or Capgemini or now UpGrad, what would sort of, because each organization has different cultures, right? And all of us sort of align to those values in a certain way. For example, if in my career I worked in a certain organization for the longest time, a lot of my editing and writing is influenced by their style.
Sure.
What are the kind of values that now when you sort of look back, what are the kind of values that you've picked up or leadership lessons that you sort of now imbibe in your journey from each of these places?
If I go to Infosys, many good things about Infosys. I'm very fortunate to have worked in that company at a time when it was growing and probably the flag bearer of the Indian tech services industry. But the one thing about Infosys that I think is core to that company even today is the importance of value systems. People talk about growth, they talk about ambition, they talk about hiring the right people, but to build a truly global organization, being centered around a value system is critical. And hiring people, building a team that subscribes to that value system and keeping that front and center is very critical. Especially when you're expanding very rapidly, often people in the front of the organization face challenging situations and they're trying to figure out what to do. And it's very difficult for decisions to be made centrally. So then you rely on their judgment and they're driven by the value system. That's Infosys. And then I'll come to Capgemini. I mean, again, Capgemini, I worked out of Paris, but I played a global role. And what does it mean to be truly global? Cap was a truly transnational company, businesses in Latin America, in Asia, obviously French headquartered, across the US, across Europe. And Capgemini has found a way to integrate workforces from all these countries into a truly global identity. And that's by not imposing a central template, but creating an inclusive culture. And coming to UpGrad, and I think this I'm truly proud of. At UpGrad and UpGrad Enterprise, we are building a company that is based on high growth, but also delivering what I'd call quality to our learners, our enterprises. Because education is a tough business. It's a trust business. So you want to grow, but at the same time, you want to stay core to the value you deliver to your stakeholders.
On that note, in September 2022, you became CEO of UpGrad Enterprise, right? What was your first mandate?
My first mandate was actually, how do we take this business truly international? That's the experience I sort of bring to the table, having worked for over 2.5 decades in a global setting. UpGrad is the market leader in India and Southeast Asia and the segments we operate in. We're looking to grow in North America.
Wasn't UpGrad international already? My understanding
was.
it was.
It was international in terms of our partnerships with universities.
Mhm.
We have a study abroad business where Indian students go global, but working with international enterprises, right, global corporates, entering markets that we've not been in. How do you build a brand? How do you build a franchise that is sustainable? How do you build it
how do you operate?
How do you operate
in those
environments, right? Where do you spot opportunity? What investment choices do you make? Those some of my.
You had university partnerships in place, but the rest of the infrastructure is what you were mandated.
That is correct. That's correct.
Okay. To go back to your biggest challenge in the first 100 days, what was like?
Well, the first 100 days seems like a lifetime ago, but I think
6 months.
No, absolutely. I'm being facetious. I think UpGrad is a market leader. India, Southeast Asia. We've had some forays into international markets, but making that mindset shift for a lot of our teams from being a leader in the markets we operate in to trying to build, a global mindset is what we worked on quite a bit. I wouldn't say it's a challenge. It's a work in progress to start thinking global, to start thinking how do you deliver quality to customers across different markets.
But that's like a cultural shift you're talking about.
It is a cultural.
It is a cultural shift.
It is a cultural shift.
Because typically when you're market leaders, you get into a zone and you get into a groove and you're functioning in a certain way.
Yes.
When you're starting out. So basically it's like having a market leader and a startup within the same company, and the same set of folks trying to think as a startup in a different meeting room when they're discussing another part of the business.
And that's a key point you bring up, right? We're now, we're a pretty big company, but we like to think of ourselves as a startup because we innovate every day. We're trying to build new products, enter new markets, and you need that sense of entrepreneurship in all parts of the company.
Correct.
And that's
Because
pretty good.
you are, for the markets you're entering, you're doing 0 to 1 journeys.
Exactly. 100%. Exactly.
What are the cultural differences that you have to account for when you are trying to move the needle to being truly global?
We're in the business of skilling.
Yeah.
And people learn differently in different parts of the world. In India, for example, people by nature are very aspirational. They put in the effort and they ask questions. They're incredibly curious, and it's a very interactive discussion. There are other parts of the world where culturally the society is very structured. So if you're delivering a learning program, what that means is that people work through a live virtual session where they listen to the instructor and park their questions for the end or offline. Now, for an instructor who's from a different part of the world, that may seem like the learner base is not engaged. It doesn't mean that. What it means is you just have to adapt to that situation. And in some cultures, not asking questions does not mean they don't absorb information. They just have a different way of processing information. There's also the pace of skilling. As Indians, we speak quite rapidly. There are other parts of the world where speaking needs to be a lot more deliberate, and tweaking for these nuances becomes important. Also, the mode of delivery. Do you do live virtual? Do you do self-serve? Because some people learn better themselves. Now, this is a cultural difference, but there are also differences across age groups. Gen Z today learns differently from Gen Y, learns differently from other people, and you've got to account for all of this in our business, which I think is fascinating.
Anecdotally, tell me some of the remarkable differences. Like, for example, I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that somebody in Germany would be far more amenable to listening and parking questions than we are usually. We jump to questions in the middle of every session.
That is correct. That's a classic example. And look, Germany is a good example because the way the German school system is structured, you listen, you absorb the content, and you're very deliberate about your questions. Now, if you have a session where you've got, let's say, learners from Asia who are, like I said, a lot more involved, learners from Europe who are a lot more structured, and you've got one set of people asking a lot of questions, which may seem like they're gaining value from the program, but the other set of people feel that their learning is a bit disrupted. How do you find that balance is critical. So you've got to then build out your program such that you're making one-to-one interventions for the people who are not as active in the program, so they learn at the same pace and they get to where they need to. At the same time, you satisfy the other set of the cohort of the population.
Gen Z and then the Gen Alpha, they are made out to be people with the attention span of a goldfish, right? I'm not sure that's true. That the way their attention works is different. But that's true of all generations. I mean, the way my parents learned was different from the way I learned. I'm sure that's true in your case. But how do you sort of tailor programs which appeal to all age groups, or at least a range of age groups? So how do you manage that?
I agree with your point that different generations learn differently, and that's been the case for centuries. I mean, that's how human beings have evolved. But what has changed is the pace of change. The generational gap from 2 generations ago to the generation before, then, you could adapt to the pace of change. Today, change is constant and very fast. So when you're talking about, let's take AI, for example, we do a lot of AI skilling, right? And, whether you're 50 or 60 years old, whether you're just starting your career, you need to understand what AI could do to your work and to your life in general. Now, for example, a Gen Z today wants experiential learning. They just want to understand, what can I do with it? They want to be hands-on because that's how they learn best. They're very tech savvy, tech native. But somebody who's, let's say, born in the 60s or the 70s has a bit of a barrier to technology. And I generalize here, but most people do. In those cases, you've got to help them get over that barrier. And so when we build programs, there is a certain base learning that we do for across generations. But then, we go into multimodal where different generations, different sets of people based on their seniority can learn differently on one-to-one. And that's critical. And that is something that the traditional university or traditional classroom-based learning can never deliver. So multimodal is where we've gone very active, made it experiential, hands-on, and almost like a one-to-one.
I mean, the traditional university or classroom model was never built to cater to multiple generations. The idea is perhaps that, you were all of the same age when you went to a certain class, more or less.
And you didn't have a choice. That was the system that exists.
You didn't have a choice.
And your point about attention spans is important. I wouldn't say Gen Z is the attention span of a goldfish. They learn differently, but today they have many choices, and today they can learn on a device. They don't need to be in a classroom. They see it as much more efficient.
I know I have, but I'm sure you've also zoned out in a lecture or completely. I would fall asleep very often. I wasn't a particularly remarkable student, but
that doesn't mean that you don't want to learn. You want to learn as much as the next person. Just because you fell asleep in a lecture does not mean that your drive is any less. And we have to adapt to that.
Correct. Because traditional colleges, if you remember, have those big lecture theaters where you had like 100 people in a room.
I've sat in the back a lot myself, so we both know what we're talking about.
Yes. We were discussing AI. How do you think AI will change the way people learn?
So we're adopting AI significantly in our learning programs, both in terms of how we skill people, but also in terms of how we run operations. My sense on AI is that it will take away a lot of barriers that cause friction to learning. Sometimes it's language. You've got an instructor who's speaking in a slightly different tonality to what you're used to. Sometimes it's pace. Sometimes it's the subject and getting it real time. All of these can be done by AI much more effectively than it could in the last. Cycle times cut down. I'll give you an example, right? So let's say a new technology comes out. It's changed in the last 1 month. In a traditional process to create content could take you 3 months. By then it's changed again. Today using AI, you can do it really quickly. Now, in some cases, you might be doing your sort of what you'd call coursework at midnight, because that's the only time of the day you have it. You have a query or a question. You want to ask somebody. In a previous generation, you couldn't. You waited till the next day or the day after.
But whenever you met the
professor.
Yeah.
And by then the intensity is gone. Today, you've got an AI tutor. You can plug a message in directly and it gives you real-time query handling, which means that your need to learn and your curiosity is fed at the time when it's at its most intense. And that makes a difference to the outcome.
Are AI tutors as good as your human interface? Like, I've had some great professors, so I can recall that their inputs were brilliant, even with students who were not as great.
So I think it's not AI or human. I'm a big believer in AI plus human.
You've spoken about human plus AI. I was reading some of things you've spoken about. Just go on. What does that mean to you?
So in my mind, yes, there are risks. AI will change some jobs completely. Some jobs will go away, but there are many other jobs that will get redefined. So going back to your example of a professor, and we all have that professor in university who's very much in demand. Everybody wants him in their course, and their time is at a premium, right?
Yes.
Now, if you had an AI complement to that professor can deliver value to 100 students, not 10, at the same level of intensity, because you still have the professor, the human, and their unique skill and ability at the center of it. But the AI can complement a lot of other things that otherwise...
Take away the mundane.
Exactly. The mundane and also the repeat.
The repeat.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. You were speaking about AI into UpGrad enterprise programs of others, right?
Yes.
Couple of things that come to my mind: virtual labs.
Yes.
Sandbox environments. Can you explain for this audience how do some of these things work for learners, and what are the changes that you're seeing?
Let's take ChatGPT. We all use ChatGPT. We've all started using that as the way we find information. But the way you prompt determines the answer. I'll give you a classic example, right? I mean, we all love cricket. If you ask ChatGPT, how is the Indian team doing? You'll get a certain sort of set of responses. But if you ask ChatGPT, what is the likelihood of the Indian team winning the Asia Cup? You'll get a wholly set of different, and these are connected questions, because that's what I, as a cricket fan, am thinking.
Correct. In my mind, they're all connected.
They're connected, but for the AI engine, they're two different questions and with two different answers. Now, therefore, the ability to prompt, which is your ability to think, structure your question, and communicate it to the model, becomes critical. So we've taught a lot of people, and these are not technologists, as to how do you use prompting better to get to the result you want. And you've seen that in many ways. You've interviewed people over the years, and as you interview people, if you want to get to a specific subject, you keep refining the way you question.
Correct. I mean, of course, for example, we use a lot of this AI in our work too, and at least in our daily routine, it has sort of found its place. but there are some users who are better than others simply because they understand their prompts are better crafted. Their prompts are, instead of 4 lines, maybe 40 lines.
Exactly.
I have colleagues who worked out how to do recursive prompts on their own. But it's it's interesting you say that. While you're saying that we will pick up these skill sets, and these skills like prompting will become important and AI will create a whole new set of jobs, which skills you think will become obsolete? How do you sort of repurpose those, that workforce, into doing something linked?
Sure. What I think will become really important is context and domain expertise. And that just can't go away, right? Because there is there is experience, there is, for example, the, interpersonal touch that human learns. And this is part of our evolution is the race that just can't go away. And therefore, I think those skills will become even more important. And there are many areas where people are just performing day jobs. I mean, I'll take an example of a bank. We serve a lot of banks. If, let's say, you're a manager at a retail bank, in a small town in India. Now, obviously, there's a whole process as a bank that you've got to do, know your customer, process, blah, blah, blah. But in essence, in retail banking, it's a customer relationship that becomes important. So if you can say that, look, I can free up my entire bank or the branch workforce to focus on talking more to customers and doing less of the paperwork that they are doing today. AI engines can do it for you, and you can focus on building the customer relationship. That changes the way banking is done. Now, of course, then you need a set of people whose comfort is building the relationship, not people whose strength is the process, because the machine can do the process, which means that you sort of train them differently. You maybe hire different people. So people who've been hired a certain way, that those jobs will change, and the employee you hire need to adapt, or you need a different kind of employee.
It's interesting you use the bank example because when I was growing up, one of the first interventions in technology pan-India level was in the banking sector.
Exactly.
Across PSU banks.
Yes.
And some of the biggest protests against adoption of technology, of computers coming in, was with the banking unions and the banking employees, because they felt that their jobs would go away. But I think as we stand, maybe 35 years later, banking jobs have grown.
They've grown exponentially. I mean, today you have the unbanked has become banked across the entire country. You have, a whole set of new banks that have been launched, purely digital, in person. So the sector has expanded, and technology has been a driver for it. And that's exactly what I see AI will do. But the banking job that was done in the 60s is no longer in existence.
You may not have a branch, you may have a virtual assistant on your app, but you still, most of us still have that customer relationship person we can message or call, right? And while at least I haven't been to a bank branch in a very, very long time after demonetization, perhaps not, right? But it's a thing where you're virtually interacting and doing the same functions.
And then it comes down to the intangibles, right? If, let's say, 3 banks are offering you the same interest rate, you instinctively gravitate to the brand that you trust. And that trust is based on the experiences you've had in your interactions with that bank, whether it's virtual, whether it's offline.
Ease of business, I think.
Ease of business, less friction.
Less friction.
Exactly.
You're with UpGrad Enterprise, and you've called B2B and B2C yin and yang.
Yes.
What does it mean in practical terms? It is a very interesting construct, but I just wanted to sort of...
No, so let me explain that, right? And we all understand the concept in India. Life is a balance. The business we are in, like I said, is we skill people, right? And why do people skill? To create new opportunities for themselves, to create new employment for themselves, to progress in their careers. So the people we skill are being hired by corporates, by governments, or they're setting up businesses of their own, right? So we need to understand what both these stakeholders want, because if you're skilling somebody to get prepared for a career, you need to know what their employer needs. Now, if you're skilling employers, the employees of large corporations,
so I think people who will hire them, what do they need?
Exactly.
Your starting point for understanding how to upskill these.
How to upskill these guys. But the flip side of it is that every employer out there is competing in a talent marketplace. They're trying to get the best employees for themselves. So they need to understand how a population that's coming into the workforce thinks. What do they value? right? We talked about generational shifts earlier, and that's what I mean by the yin and yang. That if you're able to, on one side, understand what the employers think, the corporations, the governments, and on the other side, what the learners think, and you've got both those perspectives, it keeps refining what you bring as a proposition to either set of constituents.
You're trying to basically align expectations, but isn't there a natural expectation mismatch?
No, I don't think there's a natural expectation mismatch. I think, in fact, it is important that you get both perspectives. I'll give you a classic example. We launch market reports because we skill 2 million people a year. We've skilled 12 million to date in our existence, which means we've got a large set of people that we get perspective from. We launch market reports on various aspects. Our latest report is called Skilling Smarter. And in the Skilling Smarter report, which came out about 2 months ago, we talked about the fact that 64% of employees today below the age of 30 actually don't feel comfortable talking to their manager about their problems at work. They'd rather talk to an AI engine instead, which I think is a huge, huge shift in the marketplace.
Because I think that is a societal shift in a sense. And I'll tell you my perspective. Because of the rise of social media and the way we now communicate, there is a certain comfort in anonymity that we enjoy. And speaking to somebody face to face means that you have to put a face to the name. And very often, when you're speaking to the AI, and most of these communications can become anonymous.
And it's a safe space.
And
don't feel
don't feel judged.
Yeah,
so that I think is perhaps pushing this, but it's where we are heading to. It's a societal change.
But take the flip side of the same equation. If you're a 50-something or 55-year-old manager who's managing a very young workforce, you've grown up in a workforce where you're used to talking to your seniors or managers about things at work, and that's how you solve problems. And you sort of propagate the same today. And that's where if we as a skilling company have a perspective on both sides, that actually helps us bridge better.
It's funny you say that because me and my colleague, we run a weekly sort of comic strip,
Interesting.
which is now talking about some of these things. Like we have a Gen Z intern and a very hassled millennial manager and a CEO who belongs to another generation. And you have your caricaturize them into cats. But I share that with you. It's something we talk about all the time, that there is a inherent difficulty in people communicating with each other naturally. And that can lead to some very awkward situations in real life and very funny situations for our comics.
Yeah. And look, for me, that learning happens at home. I mean, I'm proudly the father of a 70-year-old, and I like to think of myself as very with it and progressive, but my 17-year-old is the mirror in my face every day where she says that, look, you are just not with it, and so that teaches me a lot of lessons that
Your teenage daughter teaches you
absolutely
something every day.
every minute.
What did you learn today?
So the first thing I learned is that today is, and I'll give you an example. It's she's obviously about in time wise 4.5 hours behind me. She's on her way to school. She pings me because she needs money for something at school today. 5 calls in 5 minutes. I'm expected to be available. But the other way around, if I call her for something and she doesn't respond for 2 hours, that's perfectly okay. And let's go back to our generation.
Yeah.
We didn't have phones.
Correct.
But if our parents reached out to us, we just made it back home.
Your growth in the enterprise business, and how does the reverse happen? How does growth in the enterprise business improve success with your B2C?
Sure. I'll take India as an example. It is our biggest market even today. We're India headquartered. And one of the biggest opportunities that the Indian economy is facing today is the ability to employ millions of young people. And if not treated right, that could become an issue in the future, employability and creating jobs. So now when we interact with individual learners, we interact with universities, our interventions help make them more employable, make them more work ready for jobs of the future. So that actually creates a workforce, a potential workforce for employers, that they can comfortably take people who are going to get productive on the job from day 5, not day 55, because that is a productivity loss. So that's how the B2C business actually helps our enterprise business. But like I said, the flip side of it is, if you've got a set of employees who feel comfortable with the workforce you're helping create, what that means is you can create more opportunity for the learners that we do. And that's the flip side of the business that I have. Today, for example, a lot, and Nandan, who I really respect, one of the Infosys co-founders, has talked about the fact that India is going to be the AI skills capital of the world. And I think that's a huge opportunity for us as a country. And this is not just for technologists. This could be in functional roles as well. What if you had a lot of accountants, you had lawyers, you had consultants in India who are smart, who are AI ready, who could power these industries across the globe?
Clearly, these are two different divisions in your company.
Yes.
These are two different businesses. How do you prevent internal competition between the teams?
Any company will have certain internal tensions. There are drivers. And I think, honestly,
Friction is good.
it's good.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it friction. I'd call it a slight difference in objectives in the short term. But in the long term, we're all trying the same thing. And having some of that push is very, very critical, because that's how you progress. And that, I think, often, as has been said, Jim Collins said, good is the enemy of great. And complacency on something that's working is often the biggest detriment to future growth. So I think a bit of internal tension is good, as long as it doesn't become disruptive, as long as it doesn't become too political. I think, and we've been able to maintain that balance in that sense.
You're saying that you're balancing profitability and short-term business objectives with a long-term purpose. And in that sense, the long-term purpose, if it's aligned, this slight imbalance in the short term is working out. How do you genuinely put that into practice? Because it's something that all businesses struggle with. And as a leader, how do you sort of put that into practice is something that I'm very keen to understand.
Education is a trust business. Yes, we are a commercial enterprise. We're here to, make a profit. But I think we are very privileged to be in a business where we can impact millions of lives. And we've got to take that responsibility with a lot of importance. We want to deliver for our learners, but we can't cross a line. And I say this specifically because there have been instances in the markets where education trust has been misplaced in many cases.
Journalism is also a trust business, so I get that.
And so what we do is that the purpose is to make sure that people have more fulfilling careers. And as long as we keep that at the center of things and we deliver the value that we have, I think we're in the right place. Yes, there'll be questions about, is this more profitable? Is this less? But we've got to make sure that our teams don't put the profit ahead of the impact that we create on our learners, because in the long term, that is the single most important thing that will help us grow as a business and also impact millions of lives.
Okay. What does success look to Srikanth 5 years from now? And what does success mean for UpGrad 5 years from now?
I'll take UpGrad first.
Sure.
Okay. I think clearly success for us, there is revenue growth, there is profitability, there is international expansion. I like to think of us as Indian headquartered company that is truly a global world leader. And if we make progress on that, I think that's something we as UpGrad and UpGrad Enterprise will be really proud of. We've seen examples of that happen, for example, in tech services. In the last 20 years,
Yes.
Indian companies have become global leaders. And I believe that can happen in skilling and education as well. And we'd like to think we'll be one of those. So that clearly for us is success. And I think for me personally, you've talked about my industry shifts. I started in what was the FMCG business, learned a lot, and then was part of tech services where, growth was phenomenal. I had opportunities to learn. And now I'm part of a skilling business where I believe that I can help create a legacy for UpGrad as a company. And that would personally be very fulfilling for me. That's what I look at. I've been fortunate. I've played a lot of roles. So I'm not looking at this as this title or this role. It's more success in terms of the impact you create.
So what is the legacy that you would like to leave?
I'll give you if, for example, if let's say in 10 years from now, we as UpGrad could say that we've impacted 75 or 100 million lives. That's a legacy, right? If we said that we help make India AI ready, right? That is the legacy we'd like to leave, because the whole world is grappling with what does AI mean to us as individuals, us as countries, to us as economies. We have an opportunity to be the AI leader of the world, and UpGrad has a role to play in that. I think that is truly critical. And if you look at our partnership with Microsoft, it's public, so I can talk about it. Satya Nadella and Ronnie announced this together earlier this year. We are Microsoft's only skilling partner in India, named skilling partner in India. We did a joint press release, and we have an objective to skill 1 million people on AI and Copilot in the next 18 months. I mean, starting January. That's an ambitious thing.
This next set of questions is supposed to be a fun round. Sure. It's ubiquitously called a rapid fire round, but it need not be very rapid.
I used to be a quizzer, so I'm going to love this.
AI in education, hype or game changer?
Short answer is yes in spades. I think that's what I can think of. It will transform people's careers.
Your go-to app for news?
It typically used to be the BBC, but now I ask Perplexity.
One skill which you think every professional must master today?
I would say more than skill, it's an attitude. It's insatiable curiosity. That is extremely important because now you have information at your fingertips, but you need to want to seek.
Data or instinct?
Data.
Classroom or online?
A blend, but online.
Coffee or chai?
Coffee, any day. I'm a South Indian by
Your favorite memory from your IM days?
the friends I have even today. I think it was a privilege to study with some of the brightest brains in the industry who had their hearts in the right place.
If you didn't have this career, what's an alternative career that you could have pursued?
A history teacher. History is a passion. But it would have been a privilege for me to have served in the armed forces. That would have been my dream. There are a set of reasons why I did not do that, but I think that's probably the epitome of serving your country.
The most underrated skill you think leaders don't value enough, a skill?
An impression with your employees where they can come and talk to you without fear. There are a lot of leaders I've seen who are extremely successful because not just people who report to them, but people in the extended environment just feel comfortable coming and talking to them. And, often those leaders tend not to be the loudest in the room. They tend not to be, the most forceful, but they are glue in organizations. And if you took that glue away, sometimes things fall apart. But the fact that the glue is there is something many people don't notice.
Your definition of impact in one line?
Tangible when others speak about it.
One book or podcast that has changed the way you think?
There's not one, there are quite a few, but
So,
if I
go on and
pick
name a few.
one book in the last few years is Daniel Kahneman's Think Fast, Think Slow. Recently on AI, I've been reading a lot of books. The one I'm reading right now is Reshuffle by Sangeet Paul Chaudhary. Very impactful book. Mustafa Sulaiman's book on AI is very impactful as well. And I'm talking AI because that's topical right now. But if I go to podcasts, there are quite a few. One specific podcast episode is, again, Arvind Srinivas, the founder of Perplexity, on a Bay Area podcast where he talked about how Perplexity could change the way search is done globally. Like I said, I'm a history buff. I listen to William Dalrymple's podcast on Empire. Love the series. I think, and I'm a proud Indian. We have such a rich history. And, discovering facets of that is something I've enjoyed quite a bit. I'd also say that, there are quite a few podcasts on business that I hear, and there are certain specific episodes that make a lot of sense. I've typically found that, again, I have the Infosys founders, of course, who speak very well. Ronnie's podcast, and I don't say this just because he's our chairman, but, he's inspirational. Jamie Dimon is someone I listen to quite a bit. So quite a diverse set of people. Yeah.
Set of people. The one thing that your daughter has pointed out, which has changed your perception about yourself?
The thing is unconscious biases. And my daughter points it out to me all the time. I'd like to think, like I said, I'm very diverse. I'm also non-judgmental, but words I use, actions I take, she points out and says, hey, this could come across as a command to someone, not as a suggestion. So I think these are things that have caused me to reflect. And it's a function of the environments we grew up in. What was accepted 30 years ago in a certain cultural context is probably not accepted today. But someone needs to tell you that. And someone where you don't judge the messenger. And that's where I think my daughter has been my spouse, for sure, who also happens to be from Calcutta like you, and my daughter have been the biggest mirrors in my career.
Srikanth, on that very interesting note, thank you so much for being here. that brings us to the end of this edition of CXO Connect. A big thank you, Srikanth, for being here today and sharing some of these wonderful anecdotes and insights on your journey with us. And of course, thank you to our audience for joining in. And we look forward to bringing you more conversations with leaders shaping the future of business and technology in India. Until next time, goodbye.